We move on to Psalm 70 today, which is a short psalm. It is just 5 verses. And actually, this is what's interesting about this psalm. It is almost an exact duplicate of the end of Psalm 40, with a few minor variations, but it's almost an exact duplicate of the end of that psalm. It's as though David took the end of that psalm and drew it out and rearranged it a little bit to fit another situation in his life. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to just read this psalm. I want you to join me in it, Psalm 70. I don't know if we'll spend all week in Psalm 70. It's 5 short verses, maybe just the first couple days this week, and then we'll move on to Psalm 71. But I pray that it will be an encouragement to you either way. And thanks for joining me on this Monday. So let's read together Psalm 70 to the chief musician, a psalm of David to bring to remembrance. So just hang on to that phrase, to bring to remembrance. So it begins in verse 1. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt. Let them be turned back for a reward of their shame that say, Aha, aha. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. And let such as love thy salvation say continually, Let God be magnified. But I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. Thou art my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying. So I want to come back to the very first, the title of the psalm, Psalm of David to bring to remembrance. Now, as we enter into these next couple of days, let's think for a minute. Why would David pull this psalm back out, tweak it a little bit, reuse it, reapply it, create a new song from an old song? Well, there's a number of reasons why we bring things like this to remembrance. Let's just presume for a moment that David is running from Saul, maybe. Maybe he's running from Absalom. Either way, he is being pursued. Someone is seeking after his soul, and those are the two major times in his life, that long seasons where someone was seeking after his soul. And he's praying for them to be turned backward, put to confusion. But he begins the psalm by saying, this is a psalm, the purpose of this is to remember. So first thought I have is, maybe he brings this psalm out. Maybe he's not facing a hardship right now. Maybe he's flipping through his journal and he comes to this moment. Maybe it's years later. This is totally hypothetical, but I think it fits the idea of remembrance. And maybe he is living in a peaceable or a healthy or a sustained moment right now, and he remembers God's answers to these prayers. So the first reason we remember is we look back on the good things God's done in our lives. We remember the hardship he brought us through. We sat yesterday at lunch. I sat with Morris Gleiser and Charlie Wright. We talked over the last 11 years, all the amazing things, wonderful ways God's delivered us from hardship at Emmanuel. And it was just a sweet conversation. It was very much like rereading a prayer that we prayed, talking about how God delivered, how God, proved himself real in our midst. So the first reason we journal, we write down in our thoughts and devotions, and we save those things. We go back and remember them, is remembrance strengthens our faith. Didn't Jesus say, this do in remembrance of me? He knew if we would remember. Why did God ordain the routines of sacrifices, the routines of feasts and festivals and celebrations? Well, number one, he wanted his people to enjoy him. But number two, he wanted them to remember. He wanted them to know where their blessing came from, where their care and provision came from, where their purpose. He wanted them to remember him so they could remember who they are. It's so often we lose sight of who we are because we lose sight of who God is and what God has done. And we need to remember, not only do we need to remember Jesus and Calvary and the gospel and grace, we need to remember the prayers he's already answered, the things he's already done, the amazing things. So the first reason we remember is because we need to celebrate what God has done in our history and strengthening our faith. But there's a second reason David might be remembering, and it may be that he's back in a hardship. Maybe he's running again, and he needs to remember what God did the last time he faced this situation. The reality is, in this life, we're going to find ourselves praying the same prayers over and over and over. And the first few times we pray those prayers, we're like, what happened? Did God go off the rails? Did he forget me? And then he gets us through, and he sustains us, and he protects us and cares for us. And we realize, no, he didn't forget me. This is just part of the journey. It's an uphill pilgrimage. It's arduous. I'm going through valleys of shadow and near-death experiences, and I'm experiencing vulnerability and risk and hardship and burdens at times. But God's going to walk with me through all of it. And I need to remember what he did last time I faced this trial. And I'll have greater confidence and less fear this time because of my remembrance. So the first way reason we remember is because we need to look back and celebrate. The second reason we remember is we need to draw forward the last experience to go through this new experience of burden or hardship or whatever we're facing. We need to remember what God did the last time we were here. That's so powerful. But there's a third one. And maybe David is advising someone in his life who's going through something similar to what he went through. And maybe he pulls this psalm out, modifies it slightly for that person. Maybe he's wanting a new group of people to understand and newly apply this old reality in his life. Maybe he's passing on his testimony, and his remembrance is instructive and discipling for someone else. So we pass on the faithfulness of God, the testimony of God, to the generation coming behind us. And isn't that what we do every time we worship together in church in a multi-generational context? We have one generation lifting up and remembering and celebrating the praises of God to the next generation. And don't doubt for a second that the 20 and 30 somethings are sitting in the room looking at the 50 and 60 and 70 and 80 somethings, and when they see joy and celebration and passion and worship, they see faithfulness of God manifested in someone's life. So there's another really good reason to worship faithfully in remembrance, to pass on to the next generation. So I don't know why David has brought us back to the end of Psalm 40 at Psalm 70. I don't know why God believes we need this psalm, at least these 5 verses again. But I look forward to the next couple days in this journey together with you. And maybe you discern, why are we taking time to remember? Hey, have a great Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.